Greetings. It is Wednesday, February the 19th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is a special report on crisis, the U.S. Constitution, and all of those who are ripping away at it. In recent news reports, you've been seeing cases of, cases of federal judges stopping the Trump administration from auditing the U.S. government, seeking out waste, fraud, abuse, all sorts of nasty things. So much so that I would say that more than a significant majority of the United States is ready to spit blood or draw it in some extreme cases. Yet in spite of all this, the system is trying to stop what is obviously common sense. Now, the term constitutional crisis, for those who aren't really familiar with the U.S. Constitution or those of foreign nations that listen to me, the U.S. has a system of government separated into three equal parts: the executive, the president, and what he runs; the judiciary, the court system, and what they run; and the Congress, which is the legislative branch. All three are supposed to check and balance each other, which traditionally children were taught here in school, usually before they could tie their shoelaces. Unfortunately, in recent decades, we have had something called activist judges. These are judges that go in and issue orders to the executive branch to tell them to stop doing something because it is ostensibly unconstitutional. This is usually done in a way that is in a gray area. And, of course, it is then appealed and then argued in court, and we go through that process here, which is why we have more lawyers than we do engineers, but that's an argument for another time. The purpose of the Supreme Court of the United States is to determine if something is constitutional or not. Now, in spite of the fact that they have volumes and volumes and massive amounts of court cases that have been done over the centuries, a lot of the U.S. Constitution is actually pretty clearly written. I mean, in some cases it's of an older style American English, but it's pretty straightforward. Let me read you something here. We have people in the federal judiciary who think that the Trump administration should not be looking at the books, should not be closing down certain sections of the government, and all sorts of things. They're just trying to stop the guy. Let me read you something from the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 9. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. Now, I've never been to law school. I did take a course in constitutional law when I was in high school, and yes, we used to teach that stuff in high school. I haven't clerked for any member of the Supreme Court or anything like that. But to me, being John Q. Public, well, that's pretty straightforward. Not only should the president know what we spend the money on, but we should too. And for some reason, we're not being informed. Trillions of dollars, trillions, that's with a T, have gone missing. No receipts. Yet there are members of the federal bench, there are judges who think that that information should remain secret. This is what I mean by constitutional crisis. It is a constitutional crisis, and it's not being caused by the Trump administration. In spite of what people think, uneducated people think, they're doing everything by the book. It's the judiciary that was appointed by activist presidents and left-wingers and Marxists who really don't like our system of government and don't have any respect for its people. Now you see what the Founding Fathers were talking about when they were talking about domestic enemies. And that's what these people are. You come up with another interpretation of Article 1, Section 9, I'd be happy to hear it. To me, it's just common sense. To the people that penned it, it's common sense. To any human being with more than a few brain cells, it's common sense. But in reality, the U.S. has been in a constitutional crisis for a very long time. Now, most people in this country, I'm sorry to say, are horribly uneducated. Forget getting a university degree. A lot of them are pretty worthless. A lot of them really are. In spite of people saying you have to have a bachelor's, master's, or PhD to do X, Y, and Z, I have met very few in that category I thought were really, really bright. There are some, of course. I've met PhDs that I thought were dumber than a post. Plenty of those driving cabs around. Our educational system has failed us for decades. It's failed us since I was young. It started to go into bad places in the 1970s, and it never stopped. The Department of Education, which is nothing more than a money-sucking vampire that seems to be about to meet its Van Helsing and will have a stake stuck through its heart, well, that's done some damage as well. Our constitutional crisis is about people that don't even read the Constitution. It's very easy to find a copy. The National Archives has it online. You can buy ones. You can fit in your pocket. It's actually quite interesting reading, and it doesn't take very long. A ranting post on some of these websites is shorter than the U.S. Constitution. It also shows where things have been kind of messed with. Did you know that senators used to be elected by the state governments? The legislatures in various states would put them into power, and that way they were separated from the passions of the time. That changed in the early 20th century. A lot of things did. In fact, you never would have seen a Hillary Clinton back in the day who just decided to take up residence in New York and throw a few $100 million at getting a Senate seat. No, that wouldn't have happened. And we were better for it. The income tax, we used to not have direct taxes, you know. They changed that. The power to tax is the power to destroy, is an old saying. Mr. Trump is trying to maybe get rid of it. That would be wonderful. Imagine not having to live in terror of somebody who gets upset that you forgot a few receipts for gasoline or didn't have something right in your personal books. That would be amazing what that would do for this country. The Constitution has been tampered with, and it was always done for reasons that were probably not the smartest. A prohibition, wow, that, you tell me that was a smart idea. And it resulted in modern organized crime. Al Capone, you never would have heard his name if it wasn't for the U.S. Constitution banning alcohol. Amazing what we've done to ourselves. Presidents used to be able to stay in office, theoretically, for as long as they did a good job. George Washington said 2 was enough. That's just because he had had enough. If you look at his life, he gave up an awful lot for his country, more than could ever be repaid to him in honors after his passing. In fact, did you know that presidents used to be inaugurated around the time of the spring solstice? Made more sense if you think about it. One, it's warmer weather. No one's going to be stuck inside the Capitol because it's too cold outside. That custom was changed by Franklin Roosevelt, who took the oath of office at the White House because World War II was going on. That was 1945. He changed that custom, which wouldn't have been a good idea in retrospect. And, well, you'd had more time for a new administration to take over, people to get appointed, that sort of thing. Quality work we used to do. You see, our Constitution has been in crisis for a long time. Oh, back about the time women got the vote and the income tax came in and along with the Senate changes. Interesting how all that sort of happened at the same time. Maybe a point to be researched there. The reason for the constitutional crisis is not just people who don't go read the Constitution. I recommend reading it at least once a year. I know people that carry it around in their pockets, literally, pass it out to friends and business associates. Great custom. Something we should start doing more of. But people just aren't reading anything anymore. Now, if you listen to my Aurelian column here, you'll know that I'm big on reading, and I actually have a book report every Friday, and I'll probably be adding more to that soon. But we have a nation of very uneducated people, and the United States was not built for idiots, in spite of what people think. There's an old joke that the U.S. Constitution was designed by geniuses so that idiots wouldn't mess it up. Well, some idiots have, and it's been going on for a while. The United States was a country that was set up for people who could mind their own business and mind their own affairs. And education was something that was always pushed. Even the poorest of American villages and towns throughout our history had a schoolhouse. The reason that we have a 3-month holiday in the summer out of school, most countries in the world don't have anything like that. The reason we have that is because when we were more agrarian, the kids would have to help with the harvest, so they were let out of school. Farmers were going to school. That's something that the rest of the world didn't understand and certainly, in most cases, didn't practice. The U.S. was not built to be run by people in ignorance. Least of all, ignorance of their own system of government. Some years ago, I was at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and I was there at a book signing by Michio Kaku. Maybe you've heard of him. He's an activist scientist of sorts. He's had a book that just came out on something to do with physics. But one of the nice things of living in D.C., at least back then, was that if you go to the Smithsonian on a weekend, there's usually someone selling a book that was worth reading, and you got to meet the author, maybe take your picture with him, which I did on that occasion. But right in back of me in line when I was waiting to have my book signed was a security guard. And this security guard, in full uniform, was an older black man, had gray hair, and I was asking him, is there something wrong? He said, oh, no. And I said, really? He said, yeah, this is my lunch hour, or it was his time off. It was something like that. Oh, really? He had a copy of Dr. Kaku's book as well. And I said, really? You're into this? Oh, yeah, physics has been a hobby of mine since I was a kid. And he started talking about science and various things. Now, here's a guy who's a security guard. I mean, that one of those rent-a-cop types that we call, but it's actually quite an honorable profession, and I know many people that have been in it. And here's this guy on his lunch hour, and he was waiting in line to get a book signed because physics was his hobby. He probably lived in a very poor part of D.C. or Maryland. And here he was, wanting to meet one of the world's most famous scientists because he was into string theory. And he did bore me a little bit explaining it all. I didn't understand what he was talking about for the most part, but obviously he knew his stuff. Now, that guy never went off to university, most likely. That's a guy who just took it on himself to learn something very advanced. For fun. That's the sort of person that built the United States. That's the sort of men and women who made us what we are, or should say were, and want to be again. It's important to know that we are now in the midst of a revolution, not just a constitutional crisis. Because Mr. Trump, well, all these judges are saying he can't do X, Y, and Z. Frankly, if a federal judge called me on the phone and said I can't have a hamburger on Tuesdays, I would tell him to go pound salt. And perhaps Mr. Trump should do something like that. The U.S. system of government is broken not because it was badly designed or maybe amended in ways it shouldn't have been. It's broken because the people who are responsible for keeping it up are very broken and, frankly, ignorant and, in most cases, stupid. You can do something about ignorance, but stupidity, that one's hard to pull back from. The problem in this country is education, and I mean real education, people that read, people that question, people that write, people that formulate their ideas, people that try to become better. Every day they wake up, they want to learn something new. That's what the U.S. was built for. That's what our nation was founded on. Most of the people that came from overseas here, including the Founding Fathers themselves, didn't come from much. They came here and very often were of low birth and were able to get some land and put a lot into it. You see how the so-called rich people lived back in the day. We would consider them the most impoverished by today's standards. This American Revolution that we now find ourselves in has the potential for altering our country's future for the better than the original one in the late 1700s. Because it's not just a revolution about restoring our Constitution and our system of government to what it should function like. It's a revolution to throw off all the insanity that we've seen in recent decades, and more so in the last several years. The devastating tsunami of ignorance and superstition is finally receding, and the survivors are starting to come down from the hills and begin the long, arduous task of rebuilding. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends, and always share with your enemies. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My address there is MICCAMPEN, MICCAMPEN. And I do have a fundraiser going now, so a paid subscription is appreciated, as would be a donation. This podcast originates at Substack. My address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World and the Deep State must be destroyed. Good day.